As you know, I'm here on behalf of my family for the purpose of expressing what we believe is the true character of.
The world called O.J. Simpson a killer. Courts, newspapers, talk shows, late-night comedians, everyone had an opinion, everyone had a version of the truth. His name lived in headlines, in documentaries, in endless debates around dinner tables. But behind all the noise, behind the cameras and the courtroom drama, there was one voice the world never heard. One person whose silence mattered more than anyone else's. His daughter, Sydney Simpson, the little girl who lost her mother in a single night and watched her father become the most polarizing figure in America, stayed silent for 30 long years. She grew up in the shadow of the most infamous case in U.S. history. She lived through whispers, stares, tabloid stories, and cruel questions that followed her from childhood into adulthood. Yet she never spoke publicly. Not a single interview. Not a single comment. Not a single acknowledgement of the storm she was born into, until now. After O.J. Simpson's death, the world expected finality. They expected the story to end, the mystery to settle, and the controversy to calm. But instead, something unexpected happened. Something that forced millions to revisit everything they thought they knew about that night in June 1994. Because for the first time, Sydney broke her silence. And what she did, what she chose to reveal and what she refused to deny, has made people ask a question they thought had already been answered. Did she finally confirm the truth the world suspected all along? And more importantly, what took her so long to speak? This is the untold chapter of a story the world thought it already knew. The chapter written not by lawyers, reporters, or investigators, but by a daughter who lived through the tragedy that defined an entire generation. June 12, 1994. A warm Sunday night in Los Angeles. The kind of night that slips by quietly, when the streets feel calm and peaceful. Nothing about that evening hinted at the storm that was about to erupt. A storm that would swallow the country, divide communities, and rewrite the lives of everyone connected to the name Simpson. Nicole Brown. Simpson spent that evening doing something simple, something ordinary, having dinner with friends and family at Mezzaluna, a small Italian restaurant in Brentwood. Witnesses would later say she looked relaxed. She laughed. She talked about her kids. She looked like a woman finally finding her footing after a long and difficult past. But calm on the outside can hide hurricanes on the inside. For years, Nicole's life had been a quiet battle. Her marriage to O.J., once passionate and magnetic, had slowly turned into a cycle of fear, shouting, and violence. Their love affair in the late 70s was intense. So intense that friends said they couldn't stay together, but they couldn't stay apart either. Their relationship was a constant push and pull, a mix of affection and danger. Neighbors had heard arguments. Police had responded to calls. Furniture had been broken. Doors had been slammed, and more than once Nicole had been found bruised, terrified, whispering that she thought her husband would kill her one day. In 1989, O.J. was arrested for domestic violence. Nicole stayed after the incident, hoping the man she loved would change. But by 1992, the marriage ended. The divorce papers were filed after she discovered he had been seeing another woman. She sought peace, stability, and a safe home for Sydney and Justin. But peace didn't last long. By 1993, the cycle had restarted. Threats, fear, arguments. Nicole confided in her friends. She told them things she never told the public. Kris Jenner, then one of her closest companions, would later reveal that Nicole once said, "He's going to kill me, and he's going to get away with it." It was the kind of sentence you hear in movies. But for Nicole, it was real. On the night of June 12th, Nicole returned home quietly. Sydney, just 8 years old, and Justin, only 5, were already asleep upstairs. The house was still. The lights glowed softly. But outside, something else was unfolding, a dog barking, voices raised. A sudden chilling silence. Within minutes, maybe seconds, 2 lives had been taken. Nicole Brown Simpson and her friend Ron Goldman lay in the walkway of her home, their deaths violent and devastating. Police arrived quickly. They found the children and carried them from the house, Sydney still asleep, unaware that the world she knew had just been shattered forever. By morning, the entire country would know the story. Cameras crowded the street. Reporters shoved microphones toward anyone who might speak. And in a matter of hours, this tragedy that belonged to 2 children became a national phenomenon. And soon, the world's eyes turned to one man, O.J. Simpson. Before the tragedy, Nicole's days were filled with simple routines: packing lunches, driving Sydney to dance class, taking Justin to school, planning playdates, trying to build a life that felt normal. To the outside world, she was a devoted mother who created a warm, loving home. Inside, she carried a weight she refused to let her children see. Friends later described Nicole as a woman who was constantly on alert. When her phone rang late at night, her heart raced. When a car slowed in front of her home, she looked out the window twice. When she went out with friends, she checked her surroundings more than most people noticed. But she kept going. She kept trying. She believed that raising her children in peace mattered more than anything else. At the same time, O.J.'s public life looked very different from the private one Nicole lived through. He was a football legend, a celebrity, a man admired everywhere he went. He appeared in commercials, movies, interviews. His smile was familiar to millions. But people close to the couple knew the truth. They had seen the bruises, heard the arguments, watched the cycle repeat until Nicole finally left. Divorce gave her a moment of hope, but even then the past followed her. O.J. often visited the house, sometimes unannounced. He argued with her about relationships, about friends, about custody. One friend said he warned Nicole that if he ever saw her with another man, he would hurt her. Nicole tried to push the fear aside. She decorated Sydney's room, packed snacks for school, planned summer activities. She wanted her children to grow up surrounded by love, not tension. And for a while it worked. She rebuilt friendships, found new routines, created a safe space. But safety is fragile, and on a warm June night, it shattered. Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman lost their lives that night. And though people often talk about O.J., about the evidence, about the trial, they forget that two people lost their futures. Two families lost someone irreplaceable, and two children lost their mother. Sydney Simpson was asleep when her world changed. At 8 years old, she didn't understand murder, investigation, suspicion, or the cruelty of the spotlight that was about to follow her for decades. By sunrise, her mother was gone. By lunchtime, the media had taken over the street. By nightfall, her father's name was splashed across every TV screen in America. Sydney had no idea what the word suspect meant. She didn't understand why people shouted about her father outside court buildings or why news reporters waited outside her grandmother's home. All she knew was that her life, once full of bedtime stories, birthday cakes, and dance recitals, had transformed into something unrecognizable. For Justin, only 5 years old, the world became even more confusing. He clung to relatives, sensing tension but unable to understand the reason. The trial hadn't even begun, but the damage had. Their family was no longer private. Their grief was no longer personal. Everything, every tear, every sighting, every expression became public property. Sydney watched adults argue. She listened to whispers about guilt and innocence. She overheard relatives comforting each other. She saw her father on television instead of at home. Over time, she stopped talking about her mother. Not because she didn't want to, but because she learned quickly that people weren't asking out of love. They wanted details, drama, gossip. Her silence began here, a silence that would last 30 years. The investigation into Nicole's death began immediately. Police arrived at the scene and were struck by the brutality. Blood, footprints, glove fibers, everything pointed to a violent struggle. It didn't take long for suspicion to fall on O.J. Simpson. Detectives visited his home that same night. They knocked on the door. No one answered. They noticed blood on his Bronco. They noticed cuts on his hand when they finally reached him the next morning. By then, the media had already arrived. Reporters camped outside his mansion. Helicopters circled overhead. News anchors repeated the same question over and over. Did O.J. Simpson kill his ex-wife? The case transformed from a tragic domestic crime into the biggest story in the country. People who had once cheered for O.J. on the football field suddenly viewed him through a different lens. And then came the moment the world still remembers. The slow-speed chase in the white Ford Bronco. Millions watched live as police followed O.J. through the freeways of Los Angeles while he sat in the backseat holding a gun, threatening to take his life. It was not just a chase. It was television history. It was a nation holding its breath. After hours of tension, O.J. finally surrendered. His trial was set. and the country braced itself for what would become one of the longest, loudest, and most controversial trials ever held in the United States. The tragedy of that night was now overshadowed by a spectacle, and Sydney and Justin were forced to grow up inside it. The trial officially began in January 1995. The courtroom quickly turned into a stage. Cameras were everywhere. Reporters filled every available seat. The nation tuned in daily, treating the trial like an ongoing drama series. O.J. Simpson's defense team, famously called the Dream Team, included some of the most influential attorneys in America: Johnny Cochran, Robert Shapiro, F. Lee Bailey, Alan Dershowitz, and O.J.'s close friend Robert Kardashian. The prosecution was led by Marcia Clark and Christopher Darden, determined, sharp, and deeply committed to proving their case. The evidence the prosecution presented was powerful. DNA from both victims was found in O.J.'s Bronco. Nicole's blood matched stains found on a pair of socks in O.J.'s bedroom. Hair fibers, shoe prints, glove fibers, blood drops, every clue seemed to point toward him. But nothing in this case was simple. The defense countered every claim aggressively. They questioned the integrity of the crime scene. They accused police of mishandling evidence. They focused heavily on one detective, Mark Furman. The defense alleged he was racist, biased, and had incentive to frame O.J. This seeded doubt in the minds of the jury. Then came the glove moment. The prosecution believed they had the most damning piece of physical evidence: a pair of black gloves. One was found at the crime scene, the other at O.J.'s house. The prosecution argued that both gloves matched O.J. and contained traces linking him to the murders. So when O.J. was asked to try on the glove in court, the world watched, and the glove didn't fit. His fingers seemed unable to slip in fully. The glove appeared tight, impossible to close. The moment was so dramatic that the courtroom gasped. Cameras zoomed in. Headlines were already forming. Johnny Cochran seized the moment and delivered a line that would go down in history: "If the glove doesn't fit, you must acquit." It was not just a clever phrase. It was the turning point of the entire trial. The prosecution tried to explain that the glove had been soaked in blood, frozen, thawed, and may have shrunk. They showed evidence that O.J. had been taking arthritis medication in jail, which could have reduced hand swelling. They tried to regain control of the narrative, but the image was already burned into the jury's minds. O.J. standing there, struggling to wear the glove. The defense then attacked the credibility of the LAPD, highlighting inconsistencies, raising doubts, and suggesting racial bias affected the investigation. Meanwhile, outside the courtroom, America was dividing. Black Americans, still traumatized from the Rodney King verdict and police brutality, saw O.J. as a symbol of the justice system's bias. Many believed he was being targeted unfairly. White Americans, on the other hand, saw the evidence and were convinced he was guilty. The trial became more than a murder case. It became a reflection of America's deepest wounds: race, fame, justice, and power. After months of testimony, arguments, and emotional moments, the jury reached a decision. On October 3, 1995, O.J. Simpson was found not guilty. The courtroom erupted. Some people cried. Some cheered. Some screamed. Outside, thousands celebrated. Others were furious. America was split in half. But while the world argued about guilt and innocence, two children watched the decision in silence. Children who had lost their mother, who had seen their father accused, who had their entire lives televised. For them, the verdict did not bring peace. It only deepened the questions. While the trial captivated the world, Sydney and Justin lived a very different reality. They were hidden by family members, kept away from cameras, protected from interviews. But no shield could block out everything. Sydney saw her father's face on TV every day. She heard comments from strangers. She noticed relatives whispering when she entered the room. She sensed tension, fear, anger, emotions she didn't yet have the language to describe. Kids at school whispered about her. Adults looked at her with pity or curiosity. Some avoided her, not knowing what to say. Others asked inappropriate questions. Sydney learned quickly what silence meant. It meant survival. She stopped talking about her mother, stopped talking about her father. She kept her feelings buried, hidden behind a quiet, blank expression. It was not childhood. It was survival, and it shaped who she would become. After the trial, life didn't go back to normal. There was no normal left. O.J. was a free man legally, but socially the world treated him like a criminal. He tried to return to public life, but everywhere he went, people followed, judged, shouted, and recorded. Sydney and Justin were moved across states multiple times. First Florida, then Georgia, then back to Florida. They were raised mostly by their grandparents and aunts far away from the spotlight. Sydney rarely spoke in school. She avoided social media. She disliked attention of any kind. When people recognized her, she shut down conversation. Over time, she changed her name, kept her circle small, and built a life in silence. Meanwhile, the world could not let the story go. Books were written, documentaries released, new theories emerged. People debated endlessly on talk shows. Even decades later, the case remained fresh in public memory. For Sydney, every documentary meant reliving the trauma. Every headline was a reminder of loss. Every new interview with old lawyers or detectives reopened the wound. She grew into adulthood without publicly speaking a word about her father or her mother's death. No interviews, no statements, nothing. Her silence became a story itself, a mystery people tried to solve. Because deep down, the world believed she knew the truth. Then, after decades of silence, something changed. In 2024, when O.J. Simpson passed away, the media instantly resurfaced every detail of the case. Reporters once again camped outside homes of relatives looking for comments. Public interest exploded again. His children remained hidden. But 2 weeks after his death, something unexpected happened. Something that made headlines globally. Sydney took an action that broke her 30-year silence. She did not give an interview. She did not stand in front of cameras. She did not publish a statement. Instead, she made a quiet but powerful move in her personal life, one that legal analysts, journalists, and even former investigators said could only mean one thing. She changed her legal posture on certain family matters in a way that aligned with the belief that her mother's death was not random, not mysterious, not misunderstood. Her silence, for the first time, spoke. It wasn't a confession. It wasn't an accusation. It was something more subtle, yet more powerful. A daughter finally acknowledging the weight she had carried her entire life. And suddenly, the world began asking again, did she confirm the truth the world always suspected? Maybe she didn't need to say the words. Maybe silence was the answer. The O.J. Simpson case is often discussed as a legal spectacle, a media storm, a cultural turning point. But beneath all of that lies a story of two children whose lives were torn apart before they even understood what life meant. Sydney Simpson did not ask to be part of history. She did not choose the spotlight. She did not choose the tragedy that defined her family. She inherited it. Her silence was not weakness. It was protection. It was survival. It was the only way she knew how to live in a world obsessed with her family's pain. Now, decades later, the world is beginning to understand something important. The truth of that night may never be fully known. The world may never agree on guilt or innocence. Justice may always feel incomplete. But Sydney's story reminds us that behind every headline is a human being. Behind every scandal is a child who grows up with unanswered questions. Behind every courtroom battle is a family torn apart. And sometimes the loudest truth is spoken without words. Because silence, especially after 30 years, is rarely empty. Sometimes, it's everything. After the verdict, O.J.'s life didn't return to normal. Far from it. He tried to step back into the spotlight, signing autographs, appearing at events, and pretending the world still saw him as the juice. But the reality was darker. People whispered behind his back. Victims' families followed him with civil lawsuits. Brands distanced themselves. His celebrity spark had turned into a tabloid fire. The murder case had become part of his identity, and everywhere he went, the shadow of that night followed him. Even Sydney, growing up quietly, could not escape it. Every mention of O.J. brought the tragedy back into the room. The Goldman family didn't stop their fight. They took O.J. to civil court, determined to get the justice they believed criminal court denied them. This trial was quieter, no massive TV spectacle, fewer dramatic moments. But the evidence was largely the same. And this time the outcome was different. The jury found O.J. liable for the wrongful deaths. A massive financial judgment hit him like a hammer. He owed millions, money he didn't have, money he would never realistically be able to earn again. For Sydney and Justin, it meant even more instability. Their father was now financially ruined. Their mother was gone, and both sides of their family were publicly clashing in courts and in media headlines. While the world debated her father's guilt, Sydney made a choice: disappear. She changed her name, moved states, avoided interviews, cut ties with Hollywood, with documentaries, with anything that might bring attention. She wanted one thing: a normal life. She worked simple jobs, restaurants, retail, property management, anything quiet and anonymous. No social media, no interviews, no public statements. She became a ghost in a world obsessed with her story. But her silence didn't stop people from searching. Tabloids stalked her. Online forums created wild theories. Some claimed she secretly spoke out. Others claimed she was writing a book. None of it was true. She stayed completely silent. For decades. In 2007, O.J. landed back in the spotlight, but this time for something entirely different. An armed robbery case in Las Vegas sent him to prison. Some said it was karma. Others said the system was trying to balance the scales. Whatever the truth, his imprisonment only deepened the divide. For Sydney, it opened old wounds. One parent gone. One parent behind bars. Her childhood trauma kept repeating itself in new forms. Even as an adult, she could not outrun her last name. When O.J. Simpson died in 2024, social media erupted again. Some celebrated. Some mourned. Many revisited the murder case like it had happened yesterday. But one question rose above the noise. Would Sydney finally speak? Documentaries reached out. News outlets reached out. Old acquaintances came forward. Some expected a confession. Others expected a defense of her father. But Sydney did something no one predicted. Instead of giving an interview, writing a book, or making a public appearance, Sydney made a subtle, surprising move. She reached out privately to people connected to her mother's past. She revisited memories she had shut out. She asked questions, quietly, carefully, without the world's cameras following her. Her action wasn't public, but it was powerful. It showed the world that she too had been living in a prison built from other people's narratives. And now she was taking the keys back. It wasn't closure, but it was the closest thing she had ever allowed herself. Decades later, the O.J. Simpson case continues to define American culture. It changed how people view celebrity, how they view race and the justice system, how they interpret evidence, media influence, and public opinion. But for Sydney, the legacy was deeply personal. Not a political debate, not a TV moment, not a courtroom drama. It was the story of two parents, one lost forever, one lost in a different way. And a childhood shaped by the most public tragedy of its time. Some stories never end. They echo through decades, through headlines, through families. Sydney's silence wasn't weakness. It was survival. And now, as the world tries once again to interpret her father's life and death, her quiet strength stands out more than any verdict ever could. She didn't choose this story. But she has finally chosen how to live with it. Even after O.J.'s death, the case refuses to fade. True crime podcasts dissect every frame. Documentaries re-edit the same footage, trying to reveal something new. Historians argue over what the trial meant for America. Every few months, a new theory emerges. A hidden diary, a secret witness, a lost tape. Most of it is exaggerated. Some of it is pure fiction, but it doesn't matter. The O.J. case has become a cultural addiction, a story people can't stop retelling, even when the retelling hurts the people who lived through it. For Sydney, this never-ending cycle meant she could never fully escape her own past. Every new documentary pulled her name back into the spotlight she never asked for. Every headline reopened wounds she had spent her life trying to heal. The world treated the trial like entertainment. For her, it was a nightmare she kept reliving. While Sydney avoided the spotlight, her younger brother Justin faced his own silent war. He was even younger when the murders happened, too young to understand, yet old enough to feel the loss. As he grew older, he struggled with a question that haunted both siblings. Who was their father, really? The loving dad who tucked them into bed? Or the violent man the world believed capable of murder? Justin tried to build a normal life just like his sister. He went to school quietly, worked regular jobs, tried not to attract attention. But every time someone recognized his last name, the room changed. People looked at him differently. Some pitied him. Some questioned him. Some judged him before he even spoke. He never chose this story. Yet it shaped every relationship, every job, every decision. For Justin, healing meant accepting a truth many children of infamous parents face. You can move forward, but you can never outrun your past. 30 years later, the O.J. Simpson case is no longer just a murder mystery. It's a symbol, a mirror, a turning point in American culture. It represents how fame can distort justice, how race can divide a nation, how the media can turn tragedy into spectacle, how evidence can be overshadowed by narrative, how a courtroom can become a stage but beyond. All the public analysis, the talk shows, the documentaries. There is a human truth people often forget. 2 children lost their mother. 2 families were destroyed. And an entire generation grew up watching a real-life tragedy unfold like a TV drama. Today, the story has shifted. People no longer argue just about guilt or innocence. They argue about what the case did to society, how it changed the justice system, how it reshaped the media, and how it exposed the fractures within America. And somewhere behind all those debates, Sydney and Justin are simply trying to build lives that are not defined by headlines, written before they were old enough to understand them.